Jane Miller never shouted. It wasn't a weakness. It was a choice. In her 32 years of life, she had learned one rule. He who shouts loses his head, his arguments, his position. Jane preferred to think, to observe, to add up numbers in her head faster than the person she was talking to could finish a sentence. It was this very trait that had once attracted Victor to her. "You have the head of a CFO," he had told her on their third date. And Jane had laughed then, because she worked as an accountant for a small company and was not a CFO, but she didn't disdain the flattery. Victor knew how to say the right words at the right moment, how to hold a pause, and he looked at her as if there were no one else in the room, just her and him. And that look was worth more than any words. That was precisely why she had married him, not for money or status, but for the feeling that with him, she became a different version of herself, more confident, more protected, and more real. 9 years had passed since then. 9 years of marriage. A son, Leo, a 7-year-old boy with his father. A large 2-story house in the suburbs, with a spacious living room and a garden they had planted together in their first year of marriage. Jane had laughed then at how Victor couldn't hold a shovel properly. He had gotten angry, but he had laughed too. In those years, he knew how to laugh. Then, something began to change. Not sharply, but gradually, like the light in a room changing when the sun goes behind the clouds. You don't notice it until you realize it's already dark. Victor was 45. An entrepreneur with 3 company branches, separate offices, and 1 phone he never left charging in a common area. Jane saw it. She also noticed that his business trips became longer, his explanations shorter, and the look with which he once gazed at her had vanished. It was as if it had been carefully folded and put away in a drawer that no longer opened. But Jane remained silent because she knew there are things you shouldn't investigate until you're ready to accept the answer. She was never quite ready. On a Friday evening, when Leo was already asleep and Victor was in his study with the door closed, as he had done every evening for the past 6 months, Jane was washing dishes and thinking that she needed to buy new curtains for the nursery tomorrow. Leo had been asking for dark ones for a long time, so the light wouldn't wake him up in the morning. The thought was ordinary, domestic, in no way remarkable. It is with such thoughts that the middle of any life is filled. Small, domestic, utterly unheroic. On Saturday morning, Victor came down for breakfast and, without looking up from his phone, said in a level voice, the kind used to announce a change of supplier or the rescheduling of a meeting, "Linda is no longer working for us. I've paid her." Jane set her cup down on the table slowly, so it wouldn't clink. "When?" "Yesterday. Cost optimization. No point in paying for something we can do without." Linda Davis had worked for them for 3 years. Small, neat, with short, salt and pepper hair, and perpetually pursed lips, not because of her character, but simply because that was her facial expression. She performed her duties silently and well, wiped the baseboards with a damp cloth, never touched the papers on the desks, and never asked unnecessary questions. Jane respected her precisely for that, for her ability not to meddle where she wasn't asked. A rare quality. "You could have warned me," Jane said, "at least out of courtesy. She worked in our house for 3 years. It's my decision." Victor replied, and swiped the page on his phone. The dialogue was over. That's how their conversations had ended for the past 2 years. Not with a scandal, not with slamming doors, but simply with a silence into which Victor retreated as if into a shell. Jane had long ago learned not to beat her fists against this armor. It was useless. On Sunday morning, Jane was cleaning by herself. Leo had gone to his grandmother's, Jane's mother, who lived in the next town and took her grandson for sleepovers on weekends. Victor had left in the morning on business, without specifying what kind. Lately, he never explained, just said business, and closed the front door behind him with the same indifference with which he ended a conversation topic. Jane started with the kitchen, then moved to the living room, wiped the shelves, rearranged a vase, swept, and then went up to the second floor. Victor's study was closed but not locked. She opened the door and immediately smelled it. That specific scent of expensive cologne, tobacco, and paper that she always associated with her husband. Victor rarely smoked, but he sometimes allowed himself a cigar right here, in his study with the window open. Jane took a cloth and wiped the windowsill. Then the bookshelves. They were mostly filled with business books and a few volumes of American classics that Victor never read but kept for show. Then she bent down to wipe the bottom shelf. There were folders in dark covers, and out of the corner of her eye, she saw something white under the small coffee table against the wall. A paper rectangle, folded in four. It lay as if it had been hidden quickly, shoved under the leg of the table. Jane picked it up with 2 fingers, unfolded it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, large, a little shaky, like how elderly people write when they are in a hurry and afraid at the same time. The letters were uneven, the pressure strong, as if written with effort, overcoming something inside. Your husband is a monster. Look under the rug. You need to know the truth. Jane read it twice, then once more, slowly, like one reads documents that could have consequences. The only person who had been in this study was Linda. She cleaned here every week. She knew this study better than Jane did. So, Linda wasn't fired because of optimization. Jane got down on her knees in front of the large dark rug that lay in the center of the study and carefully lifted a corner. Under the rug was hardwood, dust along the edges, one stray paper clip. Jane lifted the second corner, then the third, then the fourth. Nothing. She was about to stand up when she noticed that the rug pad in one spot was slightly puckered, not in the way it gets from age. It was different, as if there was something under it. Jane ran her finger along the edge and felt something hard, taped to the underside. A small, flat key. The kind for a built-in safe or a metal box. Jane stood up and for a few seconds just stared at it, lying on her open palm. A year ago. April. She had gone to her mother's for a week. Her mother had been ill. The doctor recommended bed rest and the presence of family, and Jane had spent 7 days there, only returning home for her things. When she came back for good, Victor met her in the hallway with a smile and announced that he had done a little cosmetic renovation in the study. Painted the walls, hung a new picture. Jane had glanced in, nodded, said nice, and didn't think about it again. The painting was large, in a heavy, dark wood frame, a landscape with a river and a field on the horizon. Jane had never really looked at it closely because she rarely went into the study. There was no reason to. She walked over to the wall and took hold of the frame with both hands. The painting turned out to be surprisingly heavy. Not just a canvas. Something was adding weight. Jane took it down and leaned it against the wall. Behind the painting was a plain wall, light gray paint, a smooth surface. But there was a rectangular outline on it. Neat. Almost invisible against the paint. A metal niche, built into the wall with a small lock in the center, done professionally. Not in a hurry. Jane inserted the key, turned it. The lock clicked softly and precisely, like everything Victor did meticulously. Inside were 5 items. Jane took them out one by one and laid them on her husband's desk from left to right, like an accountant lays out reports before an audit. First, a notarized power of attorney. Jane read the first line and felt something cold slide down her spine. Not fear, no. Something more precise. The power of attorney was issued in her name, granting the right to manage their joint real estate, the house, to Victor A. Miller. The date was from April, the very same April when she was at her mother's. Second, a loan agreement in the name of Jane Miller. The amount was $40,000. The bank was unfamiliar, a small one with a name Jane had never heard. The date was May of last year. She had not made a single payment on this loan, not once. Third, an insurance policy on the life of Jane Miller. The insured amount was $500,000. The insured event, death of the insured person. The beneficiary, Victor A. Miller. Jane placed the policy on the desk very slowly, as carefully as one places things they don't want to hold but cannot let out of sight. Fourth, a purchase agreement for a condominium. The address, 14 Maple Avenue, apartment 37, registered to Victor A. Miller. Fifth, a photograph, printed on a regular printer, in color, a little grainy. Victor was standing at the entrance of an unfamiliar building. Next to him was a woman in her early 30s, blonde, in a light dress. In her arms was a child, a small one, about 3 years old. Victor wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at the woman. And in that gaze, in the tilt of his head, in the barely perceptible smile, in the way his shoulders were relaxed, Jane recognized what she hadn't seen directed at herself for a long time. She sat at her husband's desk and looked at the 5 items laid out in a row. Jane was an accountant. She knew how to read schemes, to see the movement of money behind numbers, intentions behind dates, and the person who signed them or forced them to be signed behind the documents. The scheme read like this: the house is being re-registered using a forged power of attorney. A loan is taken out in the wife's name without her knowledge. The debt hangs on her. Insurance makes her death financially profitable. A new apartment is bought for another woman and another child. And the housekeeper, who saw too much, is fired without warning. Jane got up from the desk, left the study, and went down to the kitchen. She stood for a second, looking out the window at the garden, at the apple tree that she and Victor had planted together. Then she took her phone and typed into the search bar, Notary Public Paul Sherman, Chicago. The name was on the power of attorney. Jane found his office in 3 minutes. She wrote down the address and phone number in her notes. Then she returned to the study, photographed each document separately, up close, clearly, so that all the details were legible. She put everything back in the niche, locked it, and hung the painting back in its place. She put the key back where she found it. When Victor came home at 7 p.m., he walked in, took off his jacket, and hung it in the closet. Jane had already set the table. She asked how his day was. "Fine," Victor said, and sat down to dinner. Jane watched him, the way he ate, the way he glanced at his phone, and didn't look at her at all. For 9 years, she thought it was coldness, just fatigue. Now she knew the distance was calculated. Schemes that are built over years have one vulnerability. Their creators are certain that the victim is blind, that she sees only what she is shown, and that she will remain silent because she always has. Jane remained silent. But now, for a different reason. Monday began with Jane calling in to work and taking 2 personal days. It wasn't difficult. Jane's boss, George Phillips, a man of pre-retirement age and good-natured disposition, never asked unnecessary questions if an employee rarely made requests. This was Jane's first request in a year and a half. "All right, Jane," George said, and hung up. No questions, no clarifications. Jane was grateful to him for that. She stood by the kitchen window with the phone in her hand, looking at the garden. The apple tree they had planted with Victor was now mature, tall, branched, with a dense crown. Victor had fussed over it all day back then, getting angry that the branches wouldn't bend the way he wanted. Jane had laughed. He eventually laughed too. It was all so long ago that it felt like a memory of a different person. Leo went to school on Monday morning. Jane walked him herself, took his hand at the gate, walked to the corner, and watched him disappear around the bend. The boy walked confidently, his backpack slightly askew, as always. Jane watched him go and thought that this child deserved to have a home. His home, not one that someone had re-registered with a forged paper in her absence. Victor left for the office in the early 9th hour. Jane watched from the bedroom window as he got into his car. A black Mercedes he had bought 2 years ago and was very proud of. He said a car should match one's status. The door slammed. The car pulled out of the driveway. The gate closed automatically. Silence. Jane took out her phone, opened her notes, and dialed the number for Paul Sherman's notary office. The phone was answered after the 3rd ring by a secretary, a young woman's voice, clear and habitually friendly. "Good afternoon. I need a consultation regarding a power of attorney," Jane said. "I'd like to verify a document that was allegedly notarized in my name at your office." There was a short pause on the other end. 2 seconds, no more. "Can you come in today, Mr. Sherman is available from 11. "I'll be there at 11, Jane replied. She arrived 10 minutes early. The office was located in the district's business center. A small office on the 2nd floor of an old building with high ceilings. A reception area with leather chairs and an aquarium with lethargic fish that swam so slowly they seemed to be conducting consultations themselves. Everything exuded solidity and moderate conservatism. While waiting to be called, Jane sat up straight, holding her purse on her lap, and mentally rehearsed the conversation, possible answers, and questions. She knew how to prepare for conversations in advance. This was another habit from her accounting practice. Before you go into an audit, know exactly what you want to find. Paul Sherman turned out to be exactly as Jane had imagined him. Around 60, portly, with a neat haircut and the gaze of a man who is hard to surprise. He spoke slowly, weighing his words. In 30 years of notarial practice, he must have seen it all. Forged wills, fabricated powers of attorney, families that fell apart before his eyes due to someone else's greed. Jane placed the printed photograph of the power of attorney from her phone in front of him. This document was notarized by your office. The date is April 22nd of last year. My signature, my name. But I did not sign this document, and I was not in your office on that day. Sherman put on his glasses and carefully studied the printout, unhurriedly, with a professional meticulousness that was palpable in every movement. Then he opened his computer, worked with the registry for a few minutes, checking numbers. Then he took off his glasses and folded his hands on the desk, as people do when they need to deliver unpleasant news. The power of attorney is registered in the log, he said slowly. However, I must ask you to understand, I cannot disclose the details of the notarization without an official request. If you believe the document was executed without your presence or with violations, that is grounds for an official complaint. We would then be obligated to provide the complete set of materials related to the notarization. Tell me one thing, Jane said. Her voice was steady. On April 22nd of last year, I was in another city. This can be confirmed by tickets, receipts, phone calls. If someone had a power of attorney notarized on that day in my name without my physical presence, would that have been technically possible? Sherman looked at her over his glasses with a long gaze. Theoretically, no. A notary is obligated to personally verify the identity of the principal at the time of signing. However, if passport data was used and the person who appeared was a close enough physical match, he didn't finish, but the pause was more eloquent than any words. I recommend you contact an attorney immediately. Thank you, Jane said. She stood up, put the printout back in her bag. An official inquiry will be forthcoming. From the notary's office, she drove straight to the bank, the one whose name was on the loan agreement. A small branch on the first floor of a shopping center, a couple of teller windows, a line of 3 people. Jane got in line and stood calmly, studying the information stands, interest rates, deposit conditions, refinancing ads. The bank was one of those that worked actively with individuals, offering remote services and minimal bureaucracy. Exactly what someone taking out a loan in another person's name would need. When her turn came, Jane placed her ID and the printout of the loan agreement in front of the teller. I need information on a loan issued in my name. I only found out about its existence by accident. I did not apply for or receive this loan. The employee, a young woman with a name tag that read, Alina, looked at the screen, found something, her expression changed, and she called the senior manager. A man in his 40s in a tie came over, with the expression of someone who has just been informed of a fire during a quiet shift. He led Jane to a separate office. The loan was processed remotely, he said after a few minutes of checking, through a personal account on the bank's website. The transaction was confirmed via a phone number linked to the account at the time of creation. What number? Jane asked. He recited it. Jane wrote the digits in a notepad she took from her purse, although she already knew the answer. She had known since last night when she saw the number on the agreement. A year and a half ago, Victor had changed his phone number and given the old SIM card to Jane, supposedly for her to transfer to her name for household needs. Jane kept putting off the transfer. The card was lying in her bedside table drawer. Victor knew that perfectly well. He knew everything that was in her drawers. Through which IP address was the electronic signature created for the personal account? Jane asked. The manager winced slightly. The question was inconvenient. That is the purview of the security department and law enforcement. We do not provide such data to private individuals. But if a criminal case is opened, the bank is obligated to provide all technical information upon an investigator's request. I see, Jane said. What do I need to do to dispute the loan and freeze the interest accrual pending an investigation? You need to write a statement. I'll give you the form. She wrote the statement carefully, without a single mistake, not rushing. The manager watched her and seemed to expect tears or at least a trembling voice. There was neither. She left the bank in the early afternoon, stopped on the sidewalk, took out her phone, and found the law firm she had noticed the previous evening. They had handled several high-profile cases involving fraud in property division. The website listed their specialists. Mark Dawson, 41. Specialization: family law, property disputes, civil litigation, 12 years of practice. The photo showed a serious man with the attentive gaze of someone accustomed to listening more than talking. Jane called. She made an appointment for tomorrow at 10 a.m. There were still a few hours until evening. Jane drove to the fourth address from the hidden cache, 14 Maple Avenue. She didn't plan to do anything, just to see it with her own eyes, to confirm that the address existed not just on paper. The building was a 9-story apartment block, painted beige, one of thousands of such buildings in the city, where completely different people live behind identical windows. Jane parked across the street and sat in the car for about 20 minutes, looking at the entrance. A grocery store on the ground floor, a baby stroller by the second entrance. Someone on the third floor opened a window and looked out, then closed it. Apartment 37. So, first he secured the new nest, then he dealt with the old one. Jane left at 3:30. She managed to pick up Leo from school. The boy came out with his backpack and a crumpled drawing in his hand that he had made in art class. He handed it to his mother silently, like one hands a gift they are unsure of. "It's you," he said. "I drew you." Jane took the drawing. On the paper was a figure with dark hair and big eyes, with arms spread wide like the branches of a tree. Next to it was a small figure with a backpack. "It's beautiful," she said and put the drawing in her bag, where the printouts of documents, the statement from the bank, and the notepad with her notes lay. Leo took her hand, and they walked to the car. That evening, Victor returned around 8. He was in a good mood, a rarity in recent months. He ruffled Leo's hair, asked about school, sat next to him on the sofa while the boy showed him something on his tablet. Jane watched from the kitchen and thought that behind Victor's good mood, there was always a specific reason. He didn't smile just for the sake of it. It meant that today, something in his scheme had moved in the direction he wanted. It meant she had less time than she thought. When Leo went to bed, Jane sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and systemized everything she had learned that day. She opened a new document, titled it with a single word, facts, and began to type. Dryly, without emotion, without digressions, like compiling an inventory report. Power of attorney. Date coincides with absence from the city. Notary confirmed registration but not the legality of the procedure. Handwriting analysis of the signature is required, as well as identification of the person who was present in her place. Loan. Processed remotely using an old phone number that was in Victor's possession. A dispute claim has been filed. The IP address of the transaction is a subject for an investigative request. Insurance policy. The signature on the contract needs to be verified when, under what circumstances, through which agent. The beneficiary is the husband. Apartment. A woman with a child lives there. Her identity needs to be established. Jane saved the document and closed the laptop. She put it away in a closet behind a stack of towels on the top shelf, a place Victor never looked. Then she turned off the light in the kitchen and went upstairs. Victor was asleep. Jane lay down next to him, staring at the ceiling. Leo was sleeping in the next room. A lone cricket was chirping in the garden. Methodically, without pause, as if counting the seconds, Jane thought about something simple. The person who builds a scheme against another always has one blind spot. He is convinced that the victim knows nothing, that she sees exactly as much as she has shown, that she will remain silent because she has always been silent. Jane had indeed always been silent, but tomorrow at 10 a.m., the lawyer Mark Dawson would tell her how to act, and the silence was ending. Tuesday morning, Jane put on a gray blazer, the one she wore to serious negotiations at work. Not because she wanted to make an impression. The blazer simply helped her keep her posture. Posture helped her feel more confident. Mark Dawson received her at exactly 10. The lawyer's office was on the third floor of a business center in the Loop. A spacious office with high windows, bookshelves along the walls, and a large lightwood desk on which exemplary order reigned. No extra papers, no ostentatious luxury. The workspace of a person who values clarity. Dawson was exactly as he appeared in the photo on the website. A fit man with neat dark hair, slightly touched with gray at the temples. He stood up when Jane entered, shook her hand firmly, without any extra gestures, and offered her a seat. "I'm listening," he said, and prepared to take notes. Jane spoke for 20 minutes. Without sentiment, without digressions or tears, just the facts in chronological order. The hiding place, the power of attorney, the loan, the insurance, the apartment, the photograph, the notary, the bank, everything with dates, with details, with the logical connections between events. Dawson listened without interrupting, making notes in his notepad quickly, in his own shorthand that Jane didn't try to read. When she finished, he looked at his notes for a few more seconds, then raised his gaze. "You have an analytical mind," he said. "Not as a compliment, but as a statement of fact. You've laid this out better than most paralegals compile a case file." "I'm an accountant," Jane replied. "I'm used to working with documents. That will help us." Dawson closed his notepad. "Now, to the point. For the power of attorney, we need a forensic handwriting analysis of the signature. That's the first and most important thing. If the analysis confirms the signature isn't yours, the power of attorney is void, and all transactions made based on it can be challenged. For the loan, you've already filed a claim." "That's correct. The next step is to file a police report for fraud. They'll establish the IP address as part of the investigation. For the insurance policy, we need to find out how your signature was obtained on the contract. That's a separate issue for the insurance company. And the first thing I'm doing today is placing a lien on your house. While the investigation is ongoing, the house isn't going anywhere. How quickly can you do that?" "The lien will be in place by the end of today." The police report. "It's best we go right now, together. I'll accompany you." "Okay," Jane said. They spent almost 2 hours at the police station. Dawson knew how to talk to the desk sergeants and detectives calmly, specifically, with references to statutes. The report was filed. The detective, a young man in his 30s, clearly overloaded with work, listened, took notes, and promised to pass it on for review. Dawson nodded and, on their way out, quietly said to Jane, "In a day or two, Detective Nolan will contact us. He handles these kinds of cases there. A good specialist." Jane remembered the name. They stepped outside. It was early afternoon. Dawson looked at her and asked, "Have you found out who lives in that apartment on Maple?" "No. I drove by, looked from the outside. I didn't go in." "You should have," Dawson said. "But be careful. This woman is most likely a victim herself. She just doesn't know it yet. If she confirms your husband's intentions, her testimony will carry weight. Talk to her, person to person. No aggression, no accusations." "I understand," Jane said. They said goodbye at her car. Dawson got into his, a silver Audi Jane noted, and drove off. She stood on the sidewalk for another minute. Then she took out her phone and called her mom. "Can you pick up Leo from school and have him stay with you until tomorrow?" she asked. "I have some things to take care of. Did something happen?" Her mom could read her daughter's tone. "Everything's fine, just business. I'll explain everything later." A pause. "Okay, I'll get him," her mom said, and didn't ask any more questions. Jane drove to Maple Avenue. She parked in the same spot as yesterday. She watched the entrance for a few minutes, then got out of the car, walked to the intercom of the second entrance, and pressed the button for apartment 37. A long pause. Then a woman's voice, a little wary. "Who is it?" "My name is Jane Miller. I'm here on a personal matter. It's important. Please, let me in. I won't take much of your time." Another pause. Then the lock buzzed. Jane went up to the 3rd floor. The door to apartment 37 was slightly ajar. The woman stood in the doorway, looking at Jane with the expression of someone who doesn't know what to expect, but clearly something unpleasant. Claire Evans turned out to be younger than she looked in the photograph. 29 years old, blonde, with the tired face of a young mother who doesn't get enough sleep but is holding it together. the child wasn't in her arms. The faint sound of a cartoon came from a room, and Jane understood the little one was in there, occupied. "Are you here for me?" Claire asked. "For you. My name is Jane Miller. I am Victor Miller's wife." Claire stared at her in silence for a few seconds. Then, slowly, like someone needing to lean on something solid, she stepped back and opened the door wider. The apartment was small, a two-bedroom, furnished with a neat modesty. New furniture, clean floors, children's toys by the sofa, the smell of freshly brewed coffee from the kitchen. Everything spoke of a woman who tries to create comfort with what she has and does it well. They sat at the kitchen table, across from each other. Jane placed her phone on the table with a photo of her marriage certificate open. "Victor and I have been married for 9 years," Jane said evenly. "Our son, Leo, is 7. Victor told you he was divorced." Claire looked at the marriage certificate. Her lips tightened slightly. "He said he'd been divorced for a long time," she said quietly. "That you were his ex-wife. That the house was in his name and everything was already settled. That all that was left was—" She didn't finish. "All that was left was what?" Jane asked. Claire raised her gaze. It wasn't anger in her eyes, but confusion. The particular confusion of a person whose world is crumbling beneath them and they haven't yet realized they are falling. He said that soon everything would be finalized, that the issue with the house was being resolved, that you. She stumbled again. "That you weren't contesting it." "I am contesting it," Jane said. "It's my house. I live in it. We are not divorced. He is my husband." A long silence. The sound of the cartoon came from the other room. Cheerful music. A child's laughter off-screen. "How old is your child?" Jane asked. 3 years old. Claire's voice became very quiet. "His name is Adam." Jane nodded. She looked at Claire and saw a woman who had been deceived just as she had, only from the other side of the same scheme. Claire had been shown a beautiful picture. A successful man, single, with prospects, an apartment, and plans. And behind the picture was another family, forged documents, and a $500,000 insurance policy. "I didn't come here to start a fight," Jane said. "I came because you need to know the truth, and because I need your help." Claire looked at her silently. "Victor took out a loan in my name without my knowledge. With a forged power of attorney, he's trying to transfer ownership of our house. There's an insurance policy on my life where he is the beneficiary. This is all part of one scheme. I'm already working with a lawyer. A criminal case is being opened." Claire slowly lowered her gaze to the table. "He told me." She began, and stopped. "What exactly did he tell you?" Jane asked softly. "He wrote it in his messages." Claire stood up, took her phone from the counter, held it in her hands, then placed it in front of Jane. "Here, read." Jane took the phone. The message history was long, months of messages. She scrolled down, catching fragments. Victor wrote to Claire in short, confident phrases, the way people who are used to being believed write. She reread one message twice. "When this is all over, we can start with a clean slate. The issue with the house is being resolved. Just be patient a little longer." The date was from 2 months ago. Jane placed the phone back down. "This correspondence confirms his intent," she said. "The investigator will ask you to give a statement. Are you prepared to do that?" Claire was silent for a long time. Then a child's voice came from the other room. Adam was calling for his mom. Claire stood up, left for a minute, came back, and sat down again. Her face was different, more resolute. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready. I didn't know. You have to believe me. I didn't know he was married." "I believe you," Jane replied. They sat in that kitchen for another hour. Claire talked, Jane listened, occasionally asking short, clarifying questions. Victor had appeared in Claire's life 4 years ago. They met through mutual acquaintances. He said he had been divorced for a year and a half, that his ex-wife was still living in their joint house. But by agreement, he was getting the house once he sorted out the legal formalities. That soon, they would be able to get married. He transferred money regularly for the child, for the apartment, for living expenses. He never stayed over for more than 2 nights in a row. He was always leaving on business trips. "I asked him why we saw each other so rarely," Claire said. "He'd say, Business, travel, meetings? I believed him. Adam loves him. She paused. What will happen to him now? To Adam, I mean. He's still his father. That's a separate issue, Jane said. A legal one. But you and Adam are not at fault for any of this. It's important to understand that. As she was leaving, Jane gave Claire Dawson's business card. She asked her not to call Victor yet and not to tell him about her visit. Claire nodded silently, with the look of someone still processing everything she had heard and not ready to speak aloud. Jane went downstairs to the street, got into her car. She sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, motionless, staring ahead at the road. Then she took out her phone and texted Dawson. Meeting was successful. The woman agrees to testify. There is correspondence confirming his intentions. When can you see both of us? The reply came in 3 minutes. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. Good work. Jane put her phone away, started the car, and drove to her mom's to pick up Leo. The boy was waiting for her at the gate with his scooter and the completely satisfied look of someone who had spent the day exactly as he wanted. We baked pies, he announced, getting into the car. With apples. I rolled out the dough myself. Good job, Jane said. She drove home, listening to Leo talk about dough and apples, and thought about how tomorrow at 11, in Dawson's office, she and Claire Evans would be sitting on the same side of the table. Two women whom one man had deceived in parallel, skillfully, for years. The scheme was cracking. Quietly, but distinctly. Wednesday started with a call Jane wasn't expecting. It was 7 a.m. Leo was eating breakfast in the kitchen, picking at his oatmeal with no enthusiasm, as he always did on Wednesdays because Wednesdays at school meant gym class, which he categorically disliked. Victor had already left, tossing a brief "see you tonight" and walking out without waiting for a reply. Jane was standing by the window with a mug of coffee, mentally running through the upcoming meeting at Dawson's office. She was thinking about Claire, about how she would react to the formal setting of a lawyer's office, whether she would get scared, whether she would back out at the last moment. Her phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number, a local area code. Jane Miller? A man's voice, official, with that particular measured intonation of people accustomed to delivering unpleasant news without excess emotion. Yes, this is the county court clerk's office calling. A petition has been filed concerning you. You will receive an official notification by mail. However, I am calling in advance as the petitioner is requesting an expedited hearing. The petitioner is Victor A. Miller. Jane placed her mug on the windowsill. Quietly, without a sound, what is the petition about? 3 points. First, to declare you financially incompetent and restrict your right to independently manage property. Second, to transfer full management of joint assets to the petitioner for the duration of the proceedings. Third, to temporarily restrict your parental rights due to alleged psychological instability. Jane was silent for a second, just long enough to process what she had heard and understand what it meant. Thank you for the call, she said calmly. I will await the notification. Goodbye. She placed the phone on the windowsill next to the mug. She looked at Leo. The boy was eating his oatmeal and looking at pictures in a book he had placed next to his bowl. He hadn't heard anything, or he had heard but didn't understand. Jane was grateful to him for that, for his 7-year-old focus on his own affairs, which was a real gift right now. Jane picked up her phone and wrote a single text to Dawson. Victor has filed with the court. 3 points. Incompetence, assets, restriction of parental rights. Call when you can. The reply came in 2 minutes. On my way to the office. We'll be there at 9. Come earlier than 11. We'll talk separately, before the meeting with Claire. Jane took Leo to school, walked him to the door, patted his shoulder, and waited until he went inside. Then she returned to the car, sat for a few seconds with her hands on the wheel, staring into space. Then she started the engine and drove. She was at Dawson's office at 9:15. The lawyer met her without any preliminaries, getting straight to the point. This is a classic preemptive strike, he said, sitting across from her and opening his laptop. He's trying to seize the high ground before you've had a chance to fully build your line of defense. If the court temporarily restricts your rights to the property, he gets free rein with the house. If he simultaneously adds a story about parental rights, you spend your time, nerves, and financial resources defending your child, not on attacking his scheme. It's smart, I'll be honest. A well-calculated move. What does he have as grounds for the parental rights claim? Jane asked. Dawson took a folder from his desk and opened it. He placed a sheet in front of Jane. I received a preliminary summary of the petition an hour ago through colleagues. He's attaching a medical certificate, a private psychiatric clinic. The certificate is dated last week, meaning it was obtained after you started taking action. It states that Jane A. Miller shows signs of a chronic anxiety disorder with elements of paranoid thinking and requires specialist observation. Jane took the copy of the certificate, read it carefully from the first line to the last. The clinic's name was unfamiliar, somewhere on the outskirts. The doctor's signature was illegible, intentionally or not. A round stamp, everything formally correct. The document looked just convincing enough for a judge to accept it for consideration. "Where did he get this?" she asked, although the answer was already forming itself. "He bought it," Dawson said bluntly. "There are clinics that issue such documents without a real examination of the patient, for the appropriate fee. It's a separate criminal offense, but proving it quickly isn't easy. It requires an investigation of the clinic, questioning of staff. Therefore, our countermove is simple and, at the same time, ironclad. Today, you will undergo an independent psychiatric evaluation at a state institution. I've already arranged it. The state psychiatric hospital provides expedited evaluations by referral in cases of legal disputes. You'll go there right after our meeting with Claire." "Okay," Jane said. "Now for the rest. Regarding the incompetence claim, he has no grounds. You are officially employed. You have no debts on your own obligations, and the loan that is in your name is already being disputed with the bank. I am filing a motion to dismiss with the court today. As for the property, we placed a lien on it on Tuesday, so the house is completely frozen. He cannot legally conduct any transactions with it. And fourth, today I am officially initiating the forensic handwriting analysis of the signature on the power of attorney. It will take a few days, but the result will be unequivocal. Either the signature is yours, or it's not. There's no third option." Jane listened and nodded. Dawson spoke quickly, clearly, without a single wasted word, exactly what she needed right now. Not comfort, not discussions about the unfairness of life, just concrete steps. At 11, Claire appeared. She came alone, without Adam, having asked a neighbor to watch the boy. She looked pale, bewildered. It was clear she had had a difficult night too, but she was holding it together. When she saw Jane in the reception area, she paused for a second and nodded. Jane nodded back. There was no warmth between them, but there was a shared understanding of the situation. In Dawson's office, they sat side by side, not across from each other like yesterday in the kitchen, but on the same side of the table. Claire handed her phone with the message history to the lawyer. Dawson read it silently, unhurriedly, taking photos of the pages. He occasionally asked to clarify the date or context of a specific message. "This one," he said, and turned the phone screen towards Claire. "When this is all over, we can start with a clean slate. The issue with the house is being resolved." "Did he explain to you what exactly the issue with the house is being resolved meant?" "He said the house was in his name, but there were some formalities with his ex-wife," Claire answered. "That it was a matter of time and paperwork." And the phrase, "when this is all over," did he specify what exactly had to be over? Claire paused, gathering her thoughts or her courage. It was unclear. He said, "When the property issue is closed, we'll make our relationship official." I understood it as, he'll sort out the legal side of the property division, that all that was left was to sign some papers. "Are you prepared to confirm this in a deposition with a detective?" "Yes," Claire said. Firmly, without hesitation. "I'm ready." Dawson nodded and closed his notepad. "Good. Detective Gregory Nolan from the Economic Crimes Unit will contact you in the next few days. I will inform him of your readiness to cooperate. Your messages are key evidence of premeditation. Do not delete anything. Make a backup copy on another device today. Just in case, print out the most significant fragments and keep them in paper form. After Claire left, Jane remained in the office for a few more minutes. "He knows I'm doing something," she said to Dawson. "Otherwise, he wouldn't have filed with the court so quickly, in just 2 days." "Almost certainly," Dawson agreed. "Either the bank indirectly notified him through a shared system, or the notary did, although that would be a breach, or he sensed a change in your behavior at home. Have you changed in any way over the past few days?" Jane thought honestly. "I've been talking less, but I've always been quiet. He knows that." For a person accustomed to controlling the space around him, even a barely noticeable change is a signal. Dawson closed the folder. "Be prepared, the pressure will increase. He might try to talk to you directly, to find out what you know and how far you've gotten. Don't confirm anything, don't deny anything. Any significant conversation with him should only be with witnesses present or record it. It's legal, provided you are a participant in the conversation." "I understand," Jane said. And as she was leaving, she added, "I'll buy a recorder on the way." The state hospital admitted her at 2:30. 2 hours of evaluation, standard psychodiagnostic tests, a structured interview, filling out questionnaires based on several methodologies. The doctor, an elderly woman with a soft voice and a manner of listening to an answer until the end without interrupting, never once let on what she was thinking during the process. She just asked, observed, and made notes in the chart. The conclusion was issued an hour after the evaluation was completed. Jane read it while sitting in the hallway on a hard plastic chair. "No psychiatric disorders detected. Mentally sound. Emotional state is within the reactive norm, considering the current stressful situation. No signs of paranoid thinking, anxiety disorder, or other pathological conditions were found." She photographed the document and sent it to Dawson. He replied immediately, "Excellent. Victor's private certificate is just paper. A state evaluation is an argument for the court." Jane returned home at 5 p.m. Leo was already home. Her mom had picked him up from school and brought him back. The boy was sitting on the living room rug, building a large construction set. Her grandmother was bustling in the kitchen, had made soup, put the kettle on, sliced bread. Jane hugged her by the stove, briefly, silently, burying her face in her shoulder. Her mom stroked her back and asked nothing. She knew how to be silent precisely when it was most needed. Victor returned at 7:30. He came in, took off his shoes, hung his jacket on the hook in the hallway. All his movements were familiar, calm, like a person whose day had gone according to a routine. He saw his mother-in-law in the kitchen, raised an eyebrow slightly, but said nothing. He sat down to dinner, was polite, complimented the soup, asked Leo about school, everything as usual, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't filed a court petition with 3 points against his own wife that morning. Jane watched him and thought, this is his real strength. Not money, not connections, not schemes. His composure, the ability to sit at the same table with a person he just shot at and eat soup with the air of someone who has everything under control. When her mom had left and Leo was in bed, Victor came into the kitchen where Jane was washing dishes and stopped in the doorway. He was silent for about 3 seconds. Jane could feel his gaze on her back. "You should have gotten a call today," he finally said. From the court, Jane didn't turn around, continuing to wash a plate with methodical circular motions. "I did. I want you to understand," Victor continued, in the voice of someone explaining the obvious to a stubborn child. "This isn't an attack, it's a defense of my interests and Leo's interests. You've been in an unstable state lately, you know it yourself. I'm doing this for our son." Jane placed the plate in the drying rack, picked up the next one, still not turning around. "Okay, Victor," she said. A long pause. "Is that all you have to say?" A familiar note appeared in his voice, a slight irritation that the reaction wasn't what he expected. He was used to something else. Questions, confusion, attempts to argue or justify. Her calmness annoyed him, and that was exactly what Jane was aiming for. "For now, yes," she replied. Victor stood in the doorway for a few more seconds. Then, without adding another word, he went to his study and closed the door behind him. Jane waited until his footsteps faded. Then she took a small recorder, the size of a flash drive, which she had bought on her way to Dawson's, out of her pocket and pressed stop. The display showed 42 seconds. Victor's voice was clear, confident, without a hint of doubt. I want you to understand, this isn't an attack. It's a defense of my interests. Jane connected the recorder to her phone and sent the file to Dawson with a short message. Tonight at home. He initiated the conversation himself. The reply came quickly. Save the original. This will be useful. Jane put the recorder in her pocket, wiped her hands on a towel, and turned off the light in the kitchen. A warm evening was setting in outside. The garden smelled of grass. The house was quiet, that special kind of quiet that happens when a child is already asleep and the adults have not yet said everything they intend to say to each other. Victor sat in his study behind a closed door and was, by all appearances, confident that he was in control of the situation, that his wife was scared, that the court, the certificate, and the pressure were doing their job. He was mistaken, but for now, only two people knew it, Jane and Mark Dawson. The call from Detective Nolan came on Thursday at 9:30 in the morning. Gregory Nolan introduced himself briefly. Last name, rank, economic crimes unit, and got straight to the point. His voice was low, without extra intonations, like a man who had long since stopped being surprised by what people do to each other for money and the peaceful future they imagine for themselves. Mrs. Miller, I've reviewed the materials of your report. I'd like to meet today, if you're available. There are some questions that are better discussed in person, not over the phone. I'm available, Jane said. When and where? 2 p.m. I'll text you the address. The address came a minute later. Jane forwarded it to Dawson. He replied that he would be on standby. If his presence was needed at the interview, he would come immediately. Jane wrote back, I can handle it for now. There were 4 hours until the meeting. Jane used them wisely. She sorted and systemized all the photos of the documents from the hiding place, printed them in high quality, and arranged them chronologically in clear plastic sleeves. The apartment, the power of attorney, the loan agreement, the insurance policy. This was the exact sequence in which Victor had built his scheme. First, he secured the new nest, then he dealt with the old one. Next to the documents, Jane placed the conclusion from the state hospital and a copy of her statement to the bank. The folder was substantial. Jane looked at it and thought about how a year ago, when all this was being arranged, she knew nothing. She lived in the same house, cooked dinner, took Leo to school, and had no idea that a neat scheme for her financial destruction lay in the study wall. She signed forms that her husband brought home without reading them, because she trusted him, because she believed there was no reason not to trust him. Nolan turned out to be a man in his 40s, large, with a short-trimmed dark beard and a calm gaze of someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. His office was small, without unnecessary decorations. A desk, 2 chairs for visitors, a safe against the wall, a whiteboard with some diagrams. He took the folder, leafed through it unhurriedly, with the professional thoroughness that distinguishes people who know how to truly read documents, not just skim them, but delve into every detail. He lingered on the insurance policy the longest, reread it twice, then set it aside. Did you figure out to systemize this by date yourself? He asked, without looking up from the folder. I'm an accountant, Jane replied. I'm used to working with the chronology of documents. A date is always an intention. Nolan nodded. Good, then let's get straight to the point. We initiated the handwriting analysis for the power of attorney last night. Your lawyer provided samples of your handwriting. The results will be back in 3 to 4 days. We've sent a request to the bank for the IP address used to create the loan as part of our investigation. The bank is required to respond within 2 business days. These are the 2 key points from which everything else will follow. What do you expect to find with the IP address? Jane asked. If the address matches your husband's office or his home network, it's direct proof of who exactly took out the loan. Technical data doesn't lie. He said this without irony, completely flatly, like stating an axiom. I also need documents confirming your absence from the city on April 22nd of last year. Tickets, receipts, anything with a date and your name. I've prepared them, Jane said, and took a separate envelope from her bag. A pharmacy receipt from that city with the date. A printout of calls from my number for that day. All incoming and outgoing calls with the carrier's geolocation. Nolan took the envelope, glanced inside, and for the first time during their conversation, he slightly raised an eyebrow. "You gathered this yourself?" "Yes," Jane said. The detective looked at her a little longer than one usually looks at a visitor. Then he placed the envelope in the folder and closed it. "I'll be meeting with Claire Evans tomorrow. Your lawyer has already informed her. There's one more thing. The insurance policy. Do you remember signing any documents from an insurance company in the last 2 years?" Jane thought, honestly, without rushing. 2 years ago, we renewed the insurance on our car. Victor handled it himself. I only signed a few forms he brought home. He said they were standard auto insurance documents. I signed without reading. Nolan slowly nodded. "I see. So, among those forms could have been a life insurance contract. A person signs a stack of documents without looking. A classic and very common scheme. We'll request the policy from the insurance company and determine exactly how it was signed." Driving home, Jane thought about that stack of forms from 2 years ago. Victor had placed them in front of her on the kitchen table, handed her a pen, and said, "Sign here and here." She had signed without reading, trusting him. That was exactly what he had counted on the trust built over years, which had become a tool for him. The next 2 days passed slowly. At home, Victor behaved with emphasized calm, not mentioning the court case, not asking questions, not trying to talk about her unstable state anymore. He came home, had dinner, went to his study. Jane watched him and understood that he was waiting, confident that time was on his side, that his wife was scared and slowly giving in under the pressure. He was mistaken, but he didn't know it yet. Leo was quiet during these days. Children sense tension in a house before adults are even aware of it. In the evenings, Jane read to him aloud. They had reached the middle of a big adventure book they had started a month ago. Leo listened attentively, sometimes asking questions about the plot, sometimes falling asleep right in the middle of a chapter, quietly, with the book beside him. Jane would cover him with a blanket and sit for a few more minutes in the dark, listening to his steady breathing. She thought about how this boy deserved a normal home, not one that someone was trying to take away with a forged paper. On Saturday morning, while Jane was having breakfast alone, Victor had left early. Leo was still asleep, Dawson called. "We have the results. Come to the office." She was at his office in 40 minutes. Dawson met her at the entrance, which was unusual. He usually waited in his office. From his face, Jane knew before he even opened his mouth. The results were exactly what they needed. They went into his office. On the desk lay 2 documents, each in a separate folder. The first was the report from the handwriting analysis. Jane picked it up and read the key phrase, highlighted with a marker. The signature on the power of attorney dated April 22 is not that of Jane A. Miller, but was executed by another individual with the deliberate intent to imitate her handwriting. The second was the bank's response regarding the IP address. The electronic signature for the loan application was created from an IP address registered to a legal entity, Miller Trade LLC, one of Victor's companies. The office on Newberry Street. The date and time of the application coincided with a business day when Victor, according to his business calendar, was at that very location. Jane placed both documents on the table and was silent for a few seconds. Outside the office window, it was a bright morning. The sun fell on the stack of papers, making them look almost ceremonial. "Is this enough?" she asked. "More than enough," Dawson said. "The signature isn't yours. The power of attorney is legally void. All transactions based on it fall apart. The loan was taken out from his work computer. That's fraud using personal data. The charge is clear-cut. Plus Claire's testimony, plus the messages, plus your recording of the conversation with Victor, plus the conclusion from the state hospital which completely refutes the fictitious private certificate. Nolan already knows. I sent him the materials half an hour ago. He's filing a petition to open a criminal case today." The criminal case was opened by that same Saturday evening. Nolan worked fast. Dawson would later tell Jane that the detective had a professional intolerance for schemes that go unpunished. 20 years in the Economic Crimes Unit turns a person into a special type 1 who can see intentions behind numbers and behind documents. the person who signed them or forced another to sign. Victor was charged on Sunday morning. Jane learned about it from Dawson. He called at 9 a.m. A short call. Nolan made the arrest. They're charging him on 4 counts: fraud, forgery of documents, unlawful acquisition of a loan, and attempted fraudulent transfer of property. Jane stood by the kitchen window with the phone in her hand. Outside was the garden, the apple tree in full bloom, the grass, the bright morning sky. The house was quiet. Leo was asleep. "What now?" she asked. "Now, the trial. But you are in a very strong position. The house will be secured. The power of attorney has been declared void. All transactions based on it will be reversed. The bank will clear you of the loan after the criminal case is resolved. The court will dismiss Victor's petition regarding your incompetence and parental rights. It was based on a fictitious certificate, which itself is now evidence of premeditation in the case against him." "And Claire?" Jane asked. "Claire gave her testimony on Friday. Complete, clear, detailed. She confirmed everything she told you in her kitchen." Dawson paused for a second. "She's a strong woman, as it turns out." "Yes," Jane agreed. "As it turns out." They said goodbye. Jane put her phone away and stood by the window for a long time, looking at the garden. 2 weeks later, the notary, Paul Sherman, in the presence of the detective, officially annulled the power of attorney. The entry in the registry was marked as invalid, executed with a gross procedural violation. The investigation revealed that Victor had found a look-alike woman who had practiced signing like Jane for a long time and passed her off as his wife. He had a duplicate of her ID made by hiring shady individuals. And the notary hadn't suspected a thing. The bank froze the loan agreement and officially notified Jane in writing that they had no claims against her and all accrued interest would be canceled. In the middle of the following month, the court dismissed all 3 points of Victor's petition. The fictitious psychiatric certificate was added to the criminal case file as separate evidence of intent. The private clinic that had issued it came under investigation. On the last day of that same month, Jane hired contractors. The hiding place in the study wall was sealed in half a day. First, they removed the metal box, then they plastered over the niche, and then painted it the same light gray color as the rest of the wall. The painting of the river and field that Victor had hung a year ago to cover the hiding place, Jane moved to the attic without regret. In its place, she hung Leo's drawing in a frame, the one with the figure with widespread arms like the branches of a tree, and the small figure with a backpack beside it. The boy saw it that evening when he came into the study and stood for a long time, head tilted back, looking at his drawing on the wall. "Why did you hang it here?" he finally asked. "Because I like it," Jane said. "And because this is the perfect place for it." Leo thought for a second. Then he nodded with the air of someone who has accepted an explanation and found it exhaustive. Then he took a pencil from the desk and went to his room to continue drawing, where he had many more unfinished sheets. Jane left the study and closed the door. The hiding place was gone. The scheme was gone. What remained was the house, her son, and the silence, the very same silence in which someone else's secrets used to hide. But now, there was nothing left. A person who builds a trap for another rarely considers that he might fall into it himself. Victor was calculating and cold-blooded, but he underestimated one thing: a woman who never shouts. It is especially dangerous to mistake a quiet woman for a woman who doesn't hear.